Hi there. Welcome to Philosophy of Beauty. My name is Furman de Brabander. I'm going to be the instructor for the class this summer. Let me adjust my glasses. I am pleased to be teaching this class again online for the MLA program. I have taught it before, both online and in person, and I like this class very much, and I hope you will as well. I have my full-time appointment, faculty appointments at the Maryland Institute College of Art, which is near Hopkins. It is one of the premier art colleges in the country. Because I teach an art school, topics pertaining to this course are of great interest to me. That said, however, my specialty is political philosophy. So that may show up in my considerations of the material. I may be interested in especially looking at some of these texts pertaining to what art means in the public sphere. But that does not, of course, need to color or direct your considerations of the material. I hope that your interest in these texts will be very widespread, and they can lead in many different areas and culminate in an individual research project, research paper, that where you can further your specific interests, your individual interests. Good, but more on that at a later date. The texts we're going to be reading in this class are considered to be classics in the history of what in philosophy we call aesthetics. The MLA program has dubbed this class Philosophy of Beauty. Aesthetics is another term for it, a more technical term for this division of philosophy. In philosophy, we have a couple different divisions. We have ethics, which deals with questions of good and evil, or good and bad. We have logic, which has to do with the study of persuasion and argumentation. There's metaphysics, which has to do with the study of the nature of reality or being. And epistemology, the study of knowledge. And aesthetics is a subset of philosophy, which has to do with questions of literally sensation. Aesthetics comes from the Greek word for sensation, and in particular the sensation of beauty. And this may pertain, of course, to sensation of beauty in art, but also sensation of beauty in nature. And for some of the philosophy we read, there will be a divergence upon that question where we properly perceive beauty, whether it's in nature or in works of art. Let me say a few words about some of the texts we're going to read. By the way, there is a selection of texts on your e-reserves, and each module indicates which one I've recommended for you to read. These are intended to help your understanding of the primary texts. In some cases, the primary texts are quite difficult, especially when we get to Kant and Hegel. So I highly, highly recommend that you read the readings I have on reserves. We're going to start with Plato, and we're going to read books 2 and 10 of the Republic. The Republic is Plato's classical, his classic work, his main work, you could say, and about where he, and maybe some of you have read it before, but it is the first example in the West, or at least the most mature, most complete example in the West of utopian thinking, because this is where Plato, through his mouthpiece Socrates, takes the opportunity to lay out an ideal city. The objective being to perceive justice in that city. The overarching task is to define justice. Socrates says, well, in order to define justice, we need to see it writ large, so we are going to devise the just city so that we can discern justice in it. And so it is 10 books. There are 10 books of the Republic. It's about 200 pages where they engage in this project, but they, of course, of building an ideal city, but they cover a host of related topics, issues pertaining to metaphysics, epistemology, political philosophy, of course, and aesthetics as well. Questions of art and beauty are very important for Plato as he constructs this ideal city. In Book 2, he talks about the education of the guardians, of a class of guardians, essentially the warrior class, which he devotes a lot of attention to this class. They are a very important class for him, out of which the ruling class will come. They are to be differentiated from the artisan class, which are, you could say, they are, well, the craftspeople. They're the butchers, bakers, farmers, and like they're busy. They're busy, uh, they're the foundation of the economy, if you will, of this city, of this ideal city, out of which comes a guardian class, which is, of course, necessary to defend a wealthy city, and then out of the guardian class come the rulers. And Plato is not interested in democracy. This is ruled by experts, is ruled by elite, as we will. Well, if you read the Republic, you see it's ruled by philosophers, which is a controversial idea. Some have wondered if Plato is tongue-in-cheek. And there is a lot of irony in Plato. He's very slippery, to be sure. Book 2 has to do with the education of these guardians, and in that discussion, he raises the questions of art and of literature and poetry and myth as well. So religion is incriminated as well, because Plato is very critical of the myths and how they what they inculcate, what lessons they impart, the models they offer to impressionable minds. He's also critical of fables and stories, and he is very specific about the kind of stories that we should have in an ideal city. Towards the end of the Republic, he talks, the issue of art comes up again, where he defines it, art as mimesis, and mimesis in Greek means imitation. And this is a lesser kind, the fact that it is imitation for Plato indicates that it is of low esteem. It is artists, what they are doing is really just imitating what they see. And according to Plato's metaphysics, the physical world is already at remove from reality, which is to say the material world is not real for Plato. The ideal world is real. The material world are reflections of ideals. More on that later. And so a painter who is painting a flower is doing an imitation of an imitation, if you will, in Plato's metaphysics. And so the artist is at second remove from reality, and in that case has very little to offer us or teach us. He is also worried about how art, the kind of moral lessons it teaches, the kind of passions it stokes. It urges us to feel. It urges us to cry. It urges us to feel anger and temper, and all of this stuff is this is all very dangerous. These are all dangerous temptations for the soul, according to Plato. From there, we're going to be looking at the Symposium, which is my favorite piece by Plato, which is where he talks about, this is a series of elegies to love, offered by Socrates and a couple other figures who are, these characters were historical figures in Athens at the time. Aristophanes, one of them, the comic playwright. Plato has put words in their mouth, keeping in their character what their character would have been like. Each of these characters at this symposium or drinking party offers an elegy to love, and these are really exciting and very well written and very memorable, I think. But the symposium culminates with Socrates' speech in praise of love, where he argues that love offers a path to beholding the form of beauty in itself. So we need to prosecute what that means. Then we're going to be looking at Kant's critique of judgment. Kant, this is a little bit of a leap, well, not a little bit, this is a big leap. In the history of Western philosophy, there are no major works of philosophy of art in that period. Aquinas and Augustine, some of the Renaissance philosophers have little passages where they talk about philosophy of art. Aristotle does have a treatise on poetry, and he's very important, of course, and on tragedy, I should say. That's his major work. But given the strictures of time, I have omitted him for this class, but I welcome you to make him part of your final research project if you like, and I can advise on that. But as I was saying, there is a big gap here between Plato and Kant, because my purpose in this class was to focus on the classics and to point out this ongoing discussion between the major philosophers when it comes to topics of art and beauty. And Kant, the Critique of Judgment, it's hard to underestimate its importance in the philosophy of art, even this century. In the Critique of Judgment, I'm warning you right now, will probably seem quite difficult. Kant is not the easiest author to read. As is the case with many philosophers, he comes up with his own lexicon, his own vocabulary. He's not as guilty as others, but he's still going to be a little bit of a challenge. However, I think when you get the swing of it and understand what he's saying, or understand his method or approach, I think you'll find him very valuable. I certainly have, and I've critiqued his writing for many years, but this book is really quite remarkable. Here he talks about the nature of beauty, what distinguishes a beautiful object. He talks about our aesthetic experience of the beautiful, how it is special and unique from, say, a moral experience or an empirical judgment, like in science. And he also talks about the nature of the sublime. This is very famous for his distinction. This book is famous for his distinction of beauty and the sublime. Two different types of aesthetic experiences. And this treatise on the sublime was very influential in the 19th century. And then he also talks about the nature of genius, which genius is basically, for lack of better words, the mind or the ability or the talent of the artist, and what the artist can possibly transmit to other artists, or if anything at all can be transmitted between artists of their craft. Next, we're going to take a look at Hegel's introductory lectures in aesthetics. He and Kant together have formed the two competing traditions in modern philosophy of art. If you encounter philosophers of art today, they're either of the Kantian school or the Hegelian school, and they rarely meet. they tend to disagree. Hegel is very famous for his philosophy of history, his theory of the progression of history. In philosophy, we talk about this as dialectic, the logic by which history moves to the next stage. And it is a logical progression. It is a rational progression in his mind. This was very controversial, or still. And Hegel, his greatest student, or the person he influenced the most, whose influence in turn has really borne fruit, is Marx. Marx similarly argues that history progresses, and he gives a diagnosis for the progression of history into the dictatorship of the proletariat, or communist revolution. But Hegel understands, similarly, a history of art, that there is progression in art. Just like there's progress in science, there's progress in art, according to him. And this is a very curious and strange idea, of course, but not without some controversy. But that's for us to take up and discuss at that point, to look at why he thinks, he divides history into three different periods of art, and the task for us will be to understand what distinguishes those periods, and also what he also talks about progress in the different types of art, the different media of art, painting, sculpture, architecture, poetry. He is, again, highly, highly controversial, not least with my art students. They take issue with him ranking certain arts above the others. And then, of course, Hegel is famous for offering his assessment that there is an end of art. And in his view, we were fast approaching the end of art. What he means by the end of art, well, the end has a dual meaning. It can mean the goal and also the end state. And by the end of art, he doesn't mean that art production will stop, but that we will reach the end of this progression. From Hegel, we're going to look at Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy. This is Nietzsche's first work that he writes, I believe in the 1870s. I'll find those dates out for you later. For those of you who have never read Nietzsche before, Nietzsche is going to be a very different read. I predict, by the way, you're not going to enjoy Hegel very much. Also, he tends to be a little bit dry or difficult, but the reading I've offered you is not huge. I think it's very manageable. Nietzsche, on the other hand, is a lovely writer. In much of his work, and he was very prolific for many years until he has a mental breakdown at around the age of 44, I believe, after which point he was done. So for about 10 to 15 years, he was immensely prolific. And his writing style tends to be aphoristic, meaning that he writes in short statements as opposed to long treatises. That's how his writing, I guess you could say, progresses or maybe even devolves over time. Early on, though, he is, how should I put it? Well, his work tends to be more organized or logically organized. And coherence, not the word I'm looking for here, but the Birth of Tragedy is the closest you get with Nietzsche to a scholarly treatise. And in this case, he takes on the recent German archaeological theories about the origins of theater. This was a hot topic in the mid-1800s in Germany. Germany was taking the lead in ancient Mediterranean archaeology, and many archaeologists and philosophers were wondering about, the origins of theater and tragedy in particular. And here, Nietzsche takes on the theories offered by two German philosophers, Schelling and Schiller, and in so doing, really offers a theory that is meant to shake up scholarship on tragedy. But not only that, this is the very beginning of his critique of Western philosophy and religion as well. Nietzsche did not have small goals for his critique. He had big targets almost from the beginning. He writes this book in his mid to late 20s. And he was a professor at the time, but he didn't stay so for long. He realized that German academia was not a good fit for him, and I think when we appreciate the controversial nature of his text, hopefully this will be clear why. But he gives a compelling theory here about the origin of tragedy and the meaning of art in our lives, the existential meaning of art, the existential import of art. And Nietzsche, of course, this text is very important for us because this kind of takes us full circle. This is, here he offers a very important critique of Plato, which speaks directly to the Republic books 2 and 10. And then hopefully we will be able to end with a look at part of a book by Arthur Danto called After the End of Art. I'd like to include this if and when I'm able, because this book follows neatly from Hegel, and I kind of like this as I think this is a fitting conclusion of this class because it takes us into the 20th century when beauty is no longer the premier consideration of works of art, or of artists, I should say. In fact, it might be better to say that artists aren't concerned with beauty at all. That was taken for granted for the previous 2 millennia, that is the purpose of art, but no longer. And Danto, as the title should indicate, is a Hegelian. what do we have in the world of art after art reaches an end? He offers an interesting comparison to, what should I say? Basically, a partner theory to Hegel, where Hegel offers a history of art throughout the millennia. Danto has updated that history of art over the last 2 centuries and takes us into the latter 20th century, specifically with the work of Andy Warhol, where he says that was the fundamental fracture that ended art, and after which the purpose of art has now moved into a totally different realm of consideration, which is intellectual, philosophical, political, but it is not beauty. Okay, well, so there you have it. That's a little bit of a summary of each of the main texts we'll be looking at in this class. And I'm going to try to do one of these informal lectures before each of our sections, just to give a little bit of a primer on the philosopher that we'll be reading at that time. And I urge you to get in touch with me. Email, or we can schedule a Zoom meeting. I will be using Zoom in this class, or I have it, I should say. I have an account. So if you wish to contact me via Zoom, that is a very easy way for us to converse. But email is also doable, given our different schedules, given the different schedules of everybody in this class. So be in touch. I hope you enjoy the course this semester. Thank you. Bye.